Hello everyone, in this video I'll be going over how to set up the XEntity inventory and item system asset. This asset is highly customizable as all the documentation for all the code is provided with the kit. Okay, so here I have a simple scene with a player with a simple movement script. All of the systems in this asset is designed around having a player that can move around and also has a rigid body because a lot of the detection is based on the player colliding. And you need a rigid body for the player to actually detect collisions properly. Okay. So we need three main objects in the scene for the whole system to work. The first one is the item manager. Let's add that. Create an empty object, call it item manager. And add the item manager script. And it has an item list. All of the items that we create will be added to this list. Okay. And the second is a interactor. And the interactor interacts with the item and the item game objects in the scene and also the item container. Okay, so in our case, the interactor is going to the player. If you have a player in your scene, the interactor script must be attached to the player object. So add interactor to the player. And you'll see some properties. So interaction range is basically the distance the player has to be from the item object to interact with it. Let's just set it to 5 for our case. And if you want to visualize it, just click draw range indicator. And if you don't see this range indicator, you can just turn on gizmos. Okay. And we also have the interactable highlight. So when the item interactable objects are hovered over, what color are they highlighted? If it's white, it's not going to be highlighted any color. I'll just set it to something bluish, something like this. This is good. And it takes in a main camera, so the main game viewing camera. And we'll just drag that in. It takes in an inventory, which we don't have. It is the third main object that we need in our scene, and it's a UI object, so let's just create a canvas first. And go into XEntity folder, prefabs, and you'll see the inventory prefab. Okay, so the inventory is set up in a very specific way with very specific namings, and it needs to be that way for the system to work, right? So I suggest not creating your custom item container UI. Just use the provided inventory prefab and just change the UI images. Change the background if you want to your liking. Okay. So we have all three components, and we just need to assign the inventory here. So go to the player interactor, assign the inventory, and go to the inventory. Here it takes it a carrier because every container virtually should have a carrier or an owner, right? So for this carrier, we just assign the player. Okay. And it has a UI toggle key. So the key will press to open and close the inventory UI. And drop remove item prefabs, basically, if it is true, the item prefabs will be dropped in front of the player if they're are removed from the inventory. If it is false, they will be permanently removed from the inventory with no reference left in the world. Okay. So basically now we are ready to create items. Let's go into the folder. I'll just create a new folder, call it scriptables. And the way you create items is right-click, create XEntity item. Items are scriptable objects that hold all the data for the item. Okay. Let's just create an apple. And it's because XEntity provides some items or item prefabs and some environment prefabs that we can work with to get the system going, and also provides icon sprites for the corresponding items. Okay, so let's go into our scriptables folder, scriptables folder apple, and let's just name it apple. An item per slot is how many of this type of item can each slot hold. Let's just say 3. So each slot can hold 3 apples. And for icon, we can just assign the apple icon. And for prefab, we can assign the apple prefab, the prefab with the materials applied. Okay. now we're basically ready to have the item picked up into the inventory, but we still don't have a physical representation of the item, right? So we can do that by going to prefabs, items, and actually dragging the item into the scene. Just press F to focus on it. Okay, I'll just disable the canvas for now because it's hard to see. Okay, so we have apple. So we want this apple item to be picked up whenever it's clicked. So we can add an instant harvest script to it. This instant harvest component takes in a harvest item, so the item that's going to be added to the inventory when the interactor clicks on it. Okay, so we can add that apple item that we just created. And now basically it's ready to be picked up. And if we actually activate the canvas first, make sure your inventory UI, this object here, this inventory, is activated before you start the game, because a lot of the slots and a lot of the other variables are initialized on awake, and if you don't have it active on awake, it's going to throw you some errors. Okay, so make sure it's active on play. It's going to deactivate itself on awake after initializing the variables. Okay, so hit play. Okay, you can see I can move around with WASD, and I can hit I to open the inventory. And this item gets highlighted when I hover over it, but if I go far enough away from it, it gets unhighlighted because that's my interaction range. Let's get into our interaction range, hover over the object, and left click to add it. If I click I again, you can see the item is added to the inventory. Okay. And of course you can move around the slots like this. And if you have different items, you can swap them, or if you have the same type of item, you can even stack them. And the way you use items is you click on it, and you can either use or remove. So left click on the slot with the item. If you use it, it's a standard type item, so it just says using apple. But you can put your own custom use functions for different items. And if you remove it, what happens is you'll see it drops the item collector. So this item collector is not clicked. You cannot click it to add it. You have to walk over it for the player to add the item. And then if you click I again, you see the item is added, right? Okay. Okay. Now let's add a harvestable item. So we can add a tree. So we want the tree to be cut down, right? So it has to harvest. So instead of adding an instant harvest, which just instantly adds the item to the inventory when clicked, we can add a harvestable script to this tree. This harvestable script takes in an HP, so how many times must I click it for the tree to be cut down, right? So let's just say 3, so I have to click it 3 times for the tree to be harvested. And it also takes in harvest drops. You can have as many harvest drops as you want. So these are items that the harvestable object will drop when it's harvested, right? And there's a chance, so some item can have a very low chance of being dropped, rare items. And some items can have a 100% chance of being dropped. So for this tree, let's just say it's going to drop 1 apple. There's a 100% chance of dropping 1 apple. And let's just add the apple again. And let's just say there's a 40% chance, so 0.4% chance of dropping another apple. So we know for sure all trees will drop 1 apple, and only 40% of them will drop 2 apples. Okay, now let's add another item, because when you cut down a tree, the tree should also, it's hard to see because of the inventory, the tree should also drop tree logs, right? So let's add another item. Go into XEntity scriptables, adding another item, call it log, name should also be log. So this type is default, but you can see how different weapon types, or not weapon, different item types can have different unique functionalities. For example, tool or weapon, their unique functionality is being equipped. For consumables, their functionality is being consumed at placeable places. And you can add more types. You can add more types of this. You can just go into scripts, enums, and go into this item type script and add more type of items. And you can also customize the functionalities for those type of items, which I will show you in a bit. Okay, so we have added apple, and let's add this log. Let's just say you can only add 2 logs per slot. For icon, the icon is provided for log, and for prefab, we'll also pick log. Okay, now we have the virtual item data. We just need the log prefab in the scene. Just go to items, drag the log in. Let's see. Okay. And what we'll do is assign the instant harvest to this item, because you need to know which item need to be instantly picked up, because for small items like a log or like an apple, you don't want them to be harvested, you want them to be picked up. So you have the instant harvest script. For log, I want them to be picked up when they're clicked, so I'll just have the log. Okay, you don't have to add this instant harvest to every item prefab if you don't want them to be laying around the world like this so you can pick them up, right? So let's add this, and I will apply this so it's applied to all the prefabs. So every time this item is instantiated, this instant harvest is applied to the item, right? And let's see, tree log. Okay, now for this, let's add another item. Let's just say there's a 100% chance of dropping this item, and it's gonna be a log. Okay, perfect. And we can now basically start harvesting. Let me see if I got everything down. Going to scriptable log. Yes, okay, everything's assigned. Okay, now we can pick this up as well, and this up. Click I, you can see these items are added and they swap. And this tree should be clicked 3 times before it's harvested. So 1, 2, 3. And you can see it drops that item and the log. If you walk over them, they're added. Click I, you can see the item is added. So it dropped 2 items, it seems. Okay, perfect. And you can also drop them. You can see they're dropped. Walk over them, pick them back up. Alright. So we have the harvestable system going now. And I also wanted to show you how to save game data. Okay, so the item container data. How do you save the item container data so they're persistent throughout scenes, also throughout game sessions? So the item containers have a built-in function to save data and also a built-in function to load data. We can actually use buttons, maybe use buttons. You can also do it through script. You just need to get a reference to the item container here and just call item container.save data or load data. Okay, we'll just do it through buttons. In the canvas, let's add a UI, a button. Let's save button. And go here. Save. And then add a new button, call it load button. And in here, call it load. Okay. Now let's just put it at the bottom of the screen. Save. Load. Okay. And for their click events, let's, for the save, add this click event. I want them to access the item container in this inventory. So function would be item container and save data. And the save data method takes in a parameter string ID. So each ID for each item container should be unique, because this is what you're going to, that same ID is what you're going to also use to load that data into this container, right? So for this ID, let's say inventory 1. So if you're doing it through a code, imagine having a list of all the items and looping through them and using their indexes as their ID. That's also possible. And for load, let's also add this inventory function. Call it item container and load data. And also pass in the same exact string here. Inventory 1, inventory 1. Okay. Now, save it. Save project. Okay. we haven't done something. We haven't used the item manager yet. Now, when you're saving and loading, all the items have to be added to this item list, or else it will throw you an error. So you can add the items to this list manually, just drag it, or you can just select all the items you have, right click, and then add to item list. This will give you a message saying Apple and log successfully added to the list. So the reason I suggest you do it this way is because this prevents you adding duplicates. So you can have multiple items that overlap, that are added to the list and that are not. You can select all of them and just hit add to item list. And if they're already added, those items will be ignored. You can see it gives you a little message saying they already exist in the list. And if you go in the item manager, you can see they're added to the list. Okay. So now if we hit play, and if we pick up our items, let's just harvest the inventory as well. Click I, see if our items exist. Yes, they do. They exist. And let's click save. Oh, it says data successfully saved. It looks like I forgot to close the color tag. That's why it's showing that color, but okay. Now our data is saved. Now let's start the game again. You can see the inventory is empty, but if we click load, data successfully loaded. Click I, you can see all the items are loaded. So it seems like the slots are being swapped somehow. It's probably because how the slots are initialized. This can be due to the slots being dragged around like this, because when you drag the slots, the slot's sibling index is set to the last sibling index. Okay, but basically this allows you to save and load data persistently throughout game sessions. Okay, now this system does not have functionality to save these game objects or detect when they're destroyed, so they're saved, right? So you'll probably have to add that manually through some other method, so you don't have duplicates of the objects being spawned and also their corresponding items being spawned, right? Okay, but maybe in the future update we'll also add that. Now I also wanted to show you how to add your custom functionalities to your items. So let's go into scripts, enums, item type. Let's add a different item type. Let's wait for it to load. Let's say you want armor, so you can equip it, right? Armor, you can press comma. Maybe you want magic tool. Okay, now you have the type, and you can define their unique functionalities by going to mono and item, or you can just go into your item manager. Just click the item manager, and in here it's a singleton. This class is a singleton, so it persists throughout scenes. And this use method here is where you define your unique functionalities. So let's just create a new method first. Private void armor use, and also another one, call it private void magic tool use. And they take in an item slot, so the slot the item are being used from. You need a reference to the slot, so you can remove it when you need to remove this item from the slot, right? For example, here I have the consumable items, remove one from the slot, whatever the item is consumed, right? Okay, and in this switch statement, you add your new cases, right? You add case item type dot armor, and you can just say when the type is armor, use armor, and pass in the slot. This slot is a parameter of this use item that's assigned somewhere else. And also break it. And you can add your other case, which is item type dot magic tool, and say magic tool use. Okay, and slot and break. Okay, for this one, let's just say debug.log using magic tool, or no, using armor. Should be really equipping armor, but for this example it's fine. Using magic tool. You can put your own functionalities for this. Okay, now let's go back in our game. Let's just, for simplicity's sake, go into our apple and make this armor and make the log a magic tool. Go back in the game. Okay, now if I click the apple, it says using armor, and if I click use on the log, it says using magic tool. Okay, perfect. Also, there is a way to delete the data, right? So you should make sure you delete your data that you don't need, or to create new saves with the same ID, right? So delete button. Let's put it here, call it delete. I'll show you how to do that. Delete. Okay, just go delete button. And oh, I just realized I have not added the delete functionalities to this copy of the script because I have a different copy. So I'll just tell you what to do. So normally you'll basically have the same button functionalities. Go in here, item container, and in here with the load and save data, there will also be a delete data with that string passed in. You're going to pass in the same ID used for saving the data into the delete data, and it will delete the file if the file exists with that inventory or with that data or with that data ID. Okay, well, unfortunately this copy of the script I have does not have that, but I will add that before the final publish. Okay, this is basically it, and you can also use some utility functions like tweening. For example, when I have this, right? You see the tweening is basically, the scale in and scale out of the UI, and also you can see when I pick up objects, they scale out, right? And you can use those utility as well, and there's a very extensive documentation provided with as a PDF and as HTML. And it's all the utilities are in the going to helper function struct utils are in this utils function. Okay, and that's basically it. More updates will probably come to this asset, like saving the harvestable game objects, and also more customizability with the inventory system and possibly a crafting system as well. So yeah, look forward to that. But yeah, enjoy.